You add interactions to everything on your website, and nothing seems to feel right. How do the pros create award-winning animations that people love? What's the secret sauce missing from your interactions? In this video, I'm going to show you the 12 basic principles of animation you can use to instantly make your website stand out and let you charge more for your work. Hi, I'm Devin Fountain, a low-code designer with over a decade of interactive websites and app experience. I'm going to walk you through each principle and how to apply it to your site, adding new rules every step of the way. Before we get into the 12 principles, a little history lesson. The Illusion of Life, Disney Animation, is this iconic book published in 1981 by two of Disney's animation OGs, Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston. The book is a treasure trove of insights into the art and history of Disney animation, packed with sketches, behind-the-scenes info, and most importantly, introduced the 12 principles of animation, a set of rules that became a holy grail for animators globally. Even though it's been over 40 years since its release, it's still a must-read for anyone serious about animation, showing its lasting impact on the industry. In fact, if you want to take any animation class now, that's one of the very first things you're going to learn. It's one of the very first things I ever learned when I went to college. Okay, so I've created this Webflow clonable for you to follow along with me, if you want. Otherwise, this is a free clonable. You can always download it at the end and check it out anytime you want. The very first principle of animation is squash and stretch. It's the action that gives the illusion of weight and volume to a character. This can be applied in Webflow by manipulating the size and shape of elements to give the illusion of force or momentum. This could even be applied to buttons, loaders, or interactive elements. On this page, for example, I'm using them on buttons, just so we can build on something really basic. Here I have 3 buttons. I have a normal button that has a hover, I have what's called our fun button, and I have a serious button. Now, the normal button has a really standard hover color change, and this is perfectly fine. I see this on a lot of websites, it's inoffensive, and it's really easy to do. It doesn't require you to know any animation detail. Now, the normal button here is perfectly fine. It has a hover effect of a background change, but that's it. It's just fine, at best. It doesn't have any emotion to it. It doesn't convey anything that we want it to convey. So how can we use squash and stretch to do that? Now, squash and stretch doesn't necessarily mean that it has to literally squash and stretch. It can mean we change the volume of it as it moves. We could change the speed of that thing. Anything to give it the illusion of a real human moving. I know that sounds really weird, but it's going to make some more sense as we go on. So on the fun button, I've created an interaction called Squash In. And Squash In is currently empty right now because we're going to fill it up. So I have the div block selected, which is the parent of the button container. And the reason that I've done this is because when we hover over the button, if the scale changes at all, and our mouse is slightly outside of that button, and we keep sort of hovering, you'll have this weird clipping bouncing effect. But by wrapping it in a div that never changes the size, with the button inside changing size, that whole thing can remain safe. So we're going to be animating on the div block here. I'm going to add a scale, and I'm going to say that I want the scale to be 1.2 because I want it to be long. I'm going to uncheck this box. I'm going to say 0.8 because I want it to be short. Sort of like a really oblong, cartoonish button. And that's exactly what we want to do. It's a fun button, so we want to make it fun. And instead of linear, because linear is a little slow, I'm going to set this to bounce past because I want it to be fun. I want it to jiggle. Click play. That seems nice. I want it to be a little faster. Perfect. Now, I've already gone ahead and created Squish Out for you. And Squish Out's nothing special. I've just duplicated the original Squish In, and I've set the original dimensions back to 1, 1. You can see that here. And now we save that and we go back. See, it squishes and bounces back nicely. It adds a really fun interaction to an otherwise very normal button. Again, there's nothing wrong with the first button. It's just that it's fine. It doesn't convey any mastery. It doesn't convey any personality. Now, for the serious button, we're going to do the exact same thing, but slightly different. So I've gone ahead and created Squash In 2, and Squash Out 2 is obviously already complete. It's the same one, but it's in reverse. And what we're going to do is select the button, and we're going to do a scale. We're going to maybe set this to 1.1. We're going to feel it out here, 1.15, something I like. And rather than setting the duration to 0.3, I'm going to set this to 0.6. And the reason I'm doing that is because when something is slower, it conveys that feeling of luxury, like it's more expensive. For the serious button, we want to convey a feeling of maturity, like it's expensive or like it's going to take its time because it's serious. It's not going to be fun. So in order to get that serious personality, I'm going to take this serious button. We're going to add a scale. So what's that to the button? We want to scale the button, not the div. I'm going to set this to 1.1. We're just going to feel it out here. And rather than the 0.3 seconds from the original fun button, I'm going to set this to 0.6 seconds. We're going to double this. So we want it to be serious, and serious takes time. Now I'm going to go with Out Court. Out Court is a preset that I really like. You can actually view what that looks like in the ease out here. It's a nice slow curve upwards. And I'm going to save this. Squash Out 2 already has an animation put on it. It's the exact same animation as the in, but reversed. I've taken a lot of the effort out for it. Now let's take a look again. We've added Squash and Stretch to 2 buttons, while the original still has the background color change. And we can convey a lot of personality just from these minor changes. So here's the normal button. Again, simple background change, nothing wrong with it, but it also really doesn't convey anything to the audience. Now the fun button, that's fun, right? I think it's fun. And then the serious button, it's going to scale up really slowly and scale back down even slower. Does that feel like luxury, something you would see on a really expensive site? And the thing is, all 3 buttons look exactly identical, and we've conveyed 3 different emotions just by modifying 2 of them. That's the power of using 12 principles of animation, is you convey all sorts of different things with just minor tweaks. Now, let's move on to principle number 2. Now, the second principle, anticipation, is pretty self-explanatory. It's a technique used to prepare the audience for an action. It basically lets them know that something is about to happen before it happens. I'm going to show you 2 examples here. I have this example of a navbar container, and this navbar container has a little menu as well. And normally when you hover on a menu container, you just get the pointer element. And the problem with the pointer element is that all it does is tells us that it's a button, but it doesn't quite convey what's about to happen. And that's the entire point of anticipation. It's not to let the audience know exactly what's about to happen by looking at it, but what's about to happen by interacting with it. So we have this navbar menu here, and we have a menu container. It's usually like a menu button or something like that. And usually you put a pointer element on it to convey that it's a button and that something is about to happen, but that's about it. So how can we convey something a little more? How can we anticipate the user? Let's create an animation on this. I'm going to call it anticipation in 2. And I'm going to select the first line here. And I'm going to add a scale. We're going to do 0.5 because we want that to shrink by half. In the next line, I can select it. I'm going to do a scale of 0.25. I'm going to turn off the lock because I only want the width to change, not the height. That's also 0.5. I want these to happen at the exact same time. So we don't want it to be like a PowerPoint situation. I'm going to set this to 0.3, just eyeballing it, and set it to ease. Ease is a really just very simple S-curve. When we hover on it, rather than just being a pointer, we get an indication that it's actually a menu item. And then when I click on this thing, it's going to collapse down. Now, this is a really great use of anticipation and, to be honest, a little bit of squash and stretch because we're squashing the lines on the menu button. Now, let's also pretend that we have an accordion on the page. Most of the time with an accordion, same deal. There's a pointer icon when you hover over it, letting us know that it's clickable, letting us know that it's some sort of button. But that's about it. The only other way you would know it's an actual dropdown is maybe the arrow or the section letting you know that it's frequently asked questions. But what if you've never seen a frequently asked questions section? How would you know what it's supposed to do? It might go somewhere, and if you click it, you might not be able to get back. It's a bit extreme, but you get what I'm saying. So what can we do about this one? Let's create an anticipation animation on this. I'm going to select anticipation in. This is the one that I've already created for us. And I'm going to say that on hover, what I want to happen is maybe this arrow rotates 120 degrees. That way it'll tell us which direction the FAQ will collapse down into. I'm going to add a 120 degrees. That looks pretty good. And then maybe the background changes too. I have a little arrow container here. That way when we rotate, it doesn't mess up the bounds. I'm going to say background color. I've got some here. I'm going to say pink, a little, Flux pink. I want those to happen at the same time. So I'm going to drag those together. And let's just see what that looks like. Pretty good, but kind of boring with linear. So I'm just going to select both. I'm going to put faster duration on there. I'm going to go out circ. It's almost got like a nice quick speed jump to it. That seems nice. So when we hover over that, it'll show us the arrow rotating and we'll know, this is the direction that it's going to go in. And that's pretty good. But maybe we take this up one more notch. Let's add a little move here. Let's say 0.5 rems, which is 8 pixels. I put on there, give it the same time, give it the same speed, properties, and click play. Now that seems nice. I'm going to hit save. Again, the out is automatically done for you. I'm going to preview that. So now we've got our menu. We know what that does because we hover on it. We've anticipated what it will do. And now with the FAQ section, when we hover, it tells us these things are probably going to go down. If we click, I think the arrow will probably move all the way. And there's something about that indent that makes it feel really nice. The third principle is staging. This principle is akin to the staging in theater or film. Its purpose is to direct the audience's attention and make it clear what is the greatest importance in the scene, what's happening or what's about to happen. In Webflow, staging can be about the layout and the design of the page and how it draws attention to the most important elements. This can include the use of color, contrast, or animations to highlight key components. Now, this is a rather difficult one to convey because a lot of staging is done in the actual design of the page. But staging can also be done to draw your attention on things. So in this example, I have 2 cards, one with Jane Smith and one with me, Devin Fountain. And the only difference between the two are the images at the top and the higher buttons at the bottom. Now the higher buttons are just gray and that Flux purple. And I think that that's enough to differentiate them. I would consider that staging in itself. But staging can also mean the way things are brought into the page. So if I hit Command-Shift-P to preview this, you can see the cards come up one at a time, which is a really nice way to bring those cards in. These 2 cards have a really nice intro animation when we preview the page. They both load in elegantly, one at a time. They feel nice, but they don't really have any other way to let us know what you want us to click on. So how can we do that with staging? Well, one of the ways we can do that is maybe by showing this button is the most important thing on the page. Other than the color, what's something that we could do? If you thought scaling slowly, you'd be right. So what I'm going to do here is add an animation here to this button. And I'm just going to add a scale and another scale. And I'm going to tell you why in a second. So on the first scale, I'm going to make this 0.6 seconds because I want it to be slow. And I want this to grow 1.1 times its size. I think that's a little large, so I'm going to do 1.05. So if this scales up, we'll see, click play, scales up nicely. But we want it to have a pulsing effect because we want it to really draw your attention. So I'm going to set the second button 0.6. So they're both 0.6. That way they're timed equally. And I'm going to set this to 1. And I'm going to give them both an ease, just so they are exactly the same on the in and on the out. So now we have this nice little growing and shrinking effect. I'm going to hit done. If we preview the page, we can see that happens, but it happens almost immediately. We don't actually get to see what happens. So I want to put that on a loop. That way it occurs the entire time. So now, when staging the page, we preview, the cards load in, and higher bounces over and over again, letting us know what you really want us to click. Now, this is a really simple way to stage a page. And again, a lot of it is done through the design. But what are some other ways in which you can draw someone's attention? By growing and shrinking something, by making things disappear, by making things appear, making things glow, maybe even adding some sort of underline to something. Number 4, straight ahead and pose to pose. There are 2 different types of approaches to the actual drawing process. Straight ahead action means drawing out a scene frame by frame from beginning to end, while pose to pose involves drawing a few keyframes and then filling in the rest. In Webflow context, this would refer to creating a complex animation sequence step by step, versus creating key poses / states first, and then adding in between poses. The thing about Webflow and a lot of modern animation is that the pose to pose part is done for you, as is the straight ahead. A lot of it is done through tweening, which is where you take one frame, you take the last frame, and then automatically fills in the rest through software. But one of the things that a lot of Webflow animators do is working backwards. And this is sort of a way to do that. So let's say I have this card here. It's fixed on this page so we can show off the animation. And we scroll. Nothing seems to happen right now. But the cards in here are in their final resting place. We want these cards to move from right to left as we scroll. So to animate this, in the old days, what you would do is you would literally take the first frame like this, and you would animate each one by hand until the last one is done. Or you take this first frame, you set the animation key on it, you go to the last frame, you set the animation key on it, and you work your way in the middle. But thankfully, a lot of the animation is done for us now. So what we're going to do is set an animation here on the entire page. And we're going to say while page is scrolling, because we want this to happen while the entire page is scrolling. So what we're going to do is create an animation while scrolling in view, because the right panel can scroll while the card element is fixed. So we can show what happens while it's scrolling. So while scrolling, play scroll animation. And we want it to be fully visible when it starts, because it's already at the top. It doesn't need to be doing anything else. When element is fully visible, no, we want it to be start exiting. That way, when the bottom of the page hits, that's when the animation starts to happen or starts to end. We're going to set the animation on the right panel because this is going to be our scroll trigger. I'm going to set it to while scrolling in view, play scroll animation, when element is fully visible, because the right panel is already fully visible. And we're going to end the animation when the element is fully invisible. It'll never be fully invisible because it takes up the entire height of the page, but that part doesn't matter. We're trying to convey the animation itself. And what we're going to do for this actual right panel animation, we're going to create a new scroll animation called straight ahead. So on the scroll animation, we want 0% to be the top of the page and 100% to be the bottom of the page. So what we're going to do is select this straight ahead cards element here, because this is what we're going to animate from left to right. And we're going to say move, and that automatically sets the beginning and the end for us. And with the beginning already set in place, because that's how we've designed it, we're going to set that position to 0%. We don't have to do anything. And for the end, we're going to eyeball this, but I'm going to say negative 100% because we want it to move to the left. But I think that's a little too far. So I'm just going to bring it back, 57%. Now, if we turn live preview on and we scroll, we can see that that has a really nice effect very simply. Number 5, follow through and overlapping action. Follow through means the termination of an action and its effect on the surrounding environment. Overlapping action is the tendency of parts of a body to move at a different rate. Take, for example, a person walking. When your left arm moves, your right leg moves. When your right arm moves, your right leg moves. This is an example of overlapping action. These two things happen at the exact same time. If they didn't, your whole body would feel more like a really slow PowerPoint presentation. You can apply this in Webflow by having animations affect other elements or continue after the main action has already happened. So in this example of overlapping action, I have this card. where it says no overlapping action. Now, let's pretend this is a page load. If I preview this, the card comes up, the text, the square grows, and then the labels come up. And this is something I see a lot in amateur web designs, where things happen one after another. And it's something that I want you to start changing, because if anything, I think that this has the most effect on making your animations look really nice. It's the overlapping action. Right now, if we jump into this animation, we can see that everything is grouped together in the initial state, and then afterwards, the move happens, the opacity of the text in the card, the staging panel name moves, the overlapping square grows, and then all the labels move at the same time. Now, this is really easy to understand when you're animating something. You just click them, it animates, and then the job is done. But it doesn't really convey any emotion when all of them are happening one after another. It feels static, it feels slow. So instead, we're literally just going to take all of them and bring them together. And just like that, through overlapping action, that really boring card turned into something far more interesting with zero effort. Now, if you want to go the extra mile, one thing you can do is start analyzing what things come in and how slowly you want them to come in. And it's really easy. You can keep the exact same duration timing and the easing, and all you have to do is add a little bit of a delay. Now, this is a bit like separating the steps, but the difference is that the steps don't wait for one after another to finish. By putting a delay on there, all you're saying is they occur together, but one is delayed a little longer. So in this example, I like that move and opacity are the same. If we play that, we can say that they happen very smoothly. But staging panel name move, I wish that was maybe a little slower. And I'd also like it to have maybe an opacity change too. So I'm just going to add that while we're here. Put that in the starting area. I want these to be together. That way we can see. This is 0.6. This is ease as well. Okay, so even though these are all the exact same time and these are last, they'll still play at the same time. So what I'm going to do is select these two. I'm going to give them a delay of 0.1 just to start. So we play. We can see that the card comes in and then no overlapping action comes in just slightly after. Now, if we take the scale and we position it after the 0.1, we'll say 0.2. We can see that that also occurs afterwards. And maybe I want the square to actually occur first, and I want the staging panel name to occur second, because they appear in a vertical order as that. Now the square comes in and then the text comes in. And the labels, I also want those to come in after the actual label name comes in. So the label name delay is 0.2. And I'm going to set these to 0.3. So now when we play this, they'll all come in after. But the problem is now they feel like they're all coming at the same time. And I want them to be staggered. I still want them to be overlapped, but I want them to have just a slight delay between them. So I'm going to take all three. They have 0.3 each. And rather than give them an entire point extra, what I'm going to do is just add 0.05 to them. So it's going to be 0.35. So I'll have 0.5, or we'll have 0.3, 0.35. And make sure the second one is 0.35. And I'm going to say, for the last one, 0.4, because we're adding 0.05 to 0.35. So now when we play, they should all be just very so slightly delayed. And now suddenly, with very little changes, that card feels far more expensive than it really is. And all we did was add some slight delays to it. Everything has the exact same timing. If we move down here, 0.6, 0.6, 0.6, 0.6, all with ease. So just adding a delay and coupling things together with overlapping action will make something appear far more expensive than it really is. Number 6, slow in and slow out. The movement of the human body and most other objects needs time to accelerate and slow down. For this reason, an animation looks more realistic if it has more frames near the beginning and end of a movement, and fewer in the middle. Webflow includes easing options which can help to create a natural motion. These can be adjusted to create the feeling of acceleration and deceleration. A lot of the work is already done for us. So in this example, I have this menu button, and when I click it, a menu pops out. Totally normal. This is something you would see all the time. But slow in and slow out principle says that things happen very slowly at first, then very quickly, and then very slow again. Think about it like walking. You don't just walk immediately, or running. You don't just run immediately. You start to build up to it, building up speed, and then if you want to slow down, it doesn't happen instantly. It happens by slowing down. Just like this menu is appearing instantly and disappearing instantly as well. So we want to create slow in and slow out to emulate that movement. So I'm going to click this button, which already has a mouse click on it of slow in, slow out. If we jump in here, we can see that there's a scale change, opacity, and then the list items show one after another. And just like the previous principle that we talked about, these menu items also have a slight delay of 0.05. So if we play that, you can see those happen in real time. But right now, the menu doesn't have any slow in and slow out. So we're going to add that. We can literally just select all of these and add an easing to it. And this is where you come in. You can pick whichever easing you want to choose. For me, I'm going to choose just ease. And you can see that is already instantly way better. The problem is now the moves are a little too short. So I'm going to add that to 0.6. They all float in nicely. And I think that this menu still appears a little quickly. So I'm going to make that 0.6 as well. So now when you click on the menu, it has a nice slow movement in and a nice slow movement out. It doesn't feel unnatural and it doesn't instantaneously happen. It appears like a real menu would in real life. Number 7, arc. Most human and animal actions occur along an arched trajectory, and animation should adhere to this principle by following implied arcs for greater realism. While most movements in web design tend to be linear due to the constraints of the medium, subtle arcing can still be achieved in Webflow for certain elements, like a modal appearing to rise from a button for a more natural feel. So in this example, we have a filter button, and this looks exactly like our menu from before. When we click filter, that menu appears. And we're not going to worry about timing on this one. We're just going to be worrying about arcing. And so the thing about arcing is that it's just like a body movement. It's something that I want you to keep going back to. When you imagine walking with the human body, your arm doesn't just jump forward and jump back in a really straight fashion. It has an arcing movement, almost like a semicircle. And we want that same thing to appear here when we click filter. We don't want that menu to immediately appear upwards and to the right. We want to sort of have a arcing trajectory as it's clicked. So how can we do something like that? We have this slow in 2 here. We click this, we can see that that appears. Now let's click on this button. We have an element trigger here called mouse click tap. We have an interaction already set up called arc in, and this does a lot of the work for us. The scale is automatically set to 0, 0. The opacity is set to 0, and then it just grows in opacity. Something we've already seen before. But what we want to do is create that arcing motion. So how can we do that with the scale? Well, we can treat it just like squash and stretch. And a lot of these principles start to blend together when you use them all together. So in this case, with scale, we do want it to grow to 1:1, but we also want it to take the long way around first. If we watch this over and over, we can see that it's longer than it is tall. Now the animation is still very linear when we click filter, but we want to have an arcing motion. So just like squash and stretch, we're going to have it grow long, and then we're going to have it grow tall. So right now we have the arc list scale here. When we click play, we can see that that's happening very quickly. Out circ, 0.3, because it happens quite fast. But we want to change it so that the scaling happens slightly differently. We're going to unlink these. We want to grow long, so 1 first, but we want to drop that. We want it to actually be 0. So it remains 0. So we can see and it grows long, but we can't see it because the height is actually set to 0. And then the scale, the second one, we're going to emulate the same timing, same easing. And we're going to unlink these again. And we're going to say that this is 1. Now, if I click play, because it's set to the same duration with no delay, it's going to appear exactly the same as the other one because we're modifying the X value and the Y value in the scale at the exact time without any delay. But if we add a slight delay to this, we should get long and then tall. And by playing with the delay, we can choose how long we want it to go. Now it has somewhat of an arcing motion. So by taking the first scale and setting the X value to 1 with 0.3 duration and creating another scale where the X value isn't touched, but the Y value is, and we double the duration, what ends up happening is it grows long first and then grows tall second, but they're not delayed at all. So they occur at the same time and they create this fake arcing action. So if we preview the page and we hit filter, you can see that that has a nice effect that's better than just popping out in a linear fashion. Principle 8, secondary action. Adding secondary actions to the main action gives the scene more life and can help to reinforce the main action. You can use the secondary animations to add richness in Webflow. This might be a loading spinner on a button that's been pressed, or an additional slight rotation or color change to an element being interacted with. Let's say that we have this button here. It's a trash button, and if we click it, it's going to delete this "Are you sure you want to delete everything" modal. Most people would probably think by hovering on this, we'll turn the button red, or by clicking on it, we'll turn the button red. But with secondary action, what you want to start doing is thinking, how will this thing affect the other thing that it's directly correlated with? So in this case, maybe what we want to do is create an element trigger. We'll do a mouse click, start an animation. Because this is principle 8, we'll call this 08 secondary action click. And maybe when this button is clicked, we do a background color change. I'll change this to red. We'll just kind of feel this out a little bit. And we'll set this to 0.3. Just go with the ease, that way we don't have to mess with curves. Let's take a preview. So click this, it turns red. That's fine. It immediately lets us know that this is a negative action. Now what we want to happen is for when you hover over the trash icon, it affects the other modal. So maybe when we hover over the trash icon, we can change the background color and the text. So let's do a mouse hover effect. We'll change the trash icon. We'll call this 08 secondary hover in. And we want the background color of this to change slightly. We'll go with a light pink, maybe like a pinkish red. And then we'll change the background color of this as well, because we want them to know that one thing affects the other thing. So let's say that's pink, and we'll say that this is red. Now, we're not really focused on readability here. I do want you to focus on readability in your main builds, but right now we're just focused on animation. And then we want to bring all of these together because we want them to happen at the same time. We're going to say that this is 0.3 because we want the interaction to happen quickly. We want them to be associated together. So now, when we hover, it shows everything turning pink and red. And this is an SVG with a current color fill on it. So what we can do to make that a little extra is actually add a text color change to the button as well. And that will affect that. So let's set all this to 0.3. Give it a nice ease. So now when we hover in, the button turns red, the modals turn red, and all you have to do is add a hover out. But the secondary action automatically lets us know that by hovering that trash can icon, we're going to affect something else as well. Principle 9, timing. More drawings make an action slower and fewer make it faster. Timing is critical for establishing a character's mood, emotion, and reaction. With Webflow's animation timelines, you can carefully control the timing of your animations. This can create a sense of weight and reality, or it can be used to create a more stylized feel. In this example, I have 4 different blocks, one called timing small, one timing big, timing cheap, and timing expensive. And you may remember cheap and expensive from the earlier principle number 1, squash and stretch. But in this example, I'm going to show you how timing can change the way that things feel, even if they're exactly the same. With timing small block 1, I'm going to make a load-in animation. With the timing principle, I'm going to create a page load-in animation to show you the difference between these, even though they're almost exactly identical. So with timing small block, what we're going to do is add an animation here to make it go from the left to the right. And we're going to start that at 0%. And we're going to move that to 100%. And what 100% actually means 100% of the original block. So I'm just going to increase this by an arbitrary amount. It doesn't really matter. We're going to say 1000% just to move it over to the right. You can play with whatever number you want. And by playing that, you can see that it happens very quickly. I'm going to set the initial state for the move. And I'm going to do it for the big block too, so that we can compare the two. We say 1000%. I think that's a little too far. And 0% to start. Both of these squares are going to have a timing of 1 second and an ease. If I hit play, they'll both go approximately the same amount, but they feel totally different depending on size. So timing is really important because you can create a mood with it too. So with the small block, for example, smaller things in real life tend to move faster than bigger things. If you think of them in your head like a mouse and an elephant, a mouse is going to scurry across the floor at max speed, whereas an elephant is going to saunter very slowly, wandering, swaying. It's this big hunking thing. So what we're going to do instead is set the timing for the small one at 0.3, and we're actually going to increase the timing for the big block to 1.5. And again, just feeling it out here, but you're going to immediately get a sense of speed from these two. The fast one moves quickly, like it should, and the big one moves slowly, like it should. Remember, small things should move quickly, and big things should move slowly. It creates a completely different sense of character. Now, with timing cheap and timing expensive, this is another one of those examples just like in squash and stretch. Where just changing the timing on the scale can completely alter the way it feels. So I'm going to create 2 different scales for each one. One will be our initial, and the other will be our end result. And for our initial, we're going to start with 0 because we want them to be completely invisible. And we're going to scale them up to 1. So they're going to be exactly identical. The only thing we're going to change is the timing between the two. I'm going to give them both an ease and 0.6 timing. I'm going to press play. See? Both exactly identical. Now, if we take the cheap one and we speed it up, let's say 0.3, and we leave the expensive one at 0.6, it feels a lot snappier, a lot cheaper. And if we take the expensive one and we increase that by double to 1.2, it seems to take its time. It feels more expensive. So just using timing will allow you to create these moods, different characters using just objects. I mean, these are just simple squares and circles, if you think about it. So what can you do with cards, buttons, text, images? There's all sorts of things you can do with timing to give them character without using any other principle. But I want you to keep building on those. Number 10, exaggeration. This is an effect especially useful for animation, as animated motions that strive for a perfect imitation of reality can look static and dull. While realism might not always be the goal in web design, some degree of exaggeration can draw attention and making interactions more satisfying. This could be as simple as making a button press more announced. While realism might not always be the goal in web design, Some degree of exaggeration can draw attention and make interactions more satisfying. This could be as simple as making a button press animation more pronounced. In this example, I have 3 different small animations, and these are something you would see on a page anywhere. But exaggeration is the key here. Again, like I mentioned earlier, it's easier to pull back from exaggeration than it is to add exaggeration. So in this case, I want you to start thinking about what can we add to things that already exist on the page. So with a link, how can we exaggerate an underline on the link, something that you see frequently by default? It's easy. We're going to add an exaggeration underline. I have an exaggeration link item here. This is a link block, and I have a piece of text inside. And then I also have an exaggeration links underline. And if you look at this, it has a width set to 0%. If I extend it, you can kind of see where that's going. And a height of 2 pixels. I give it a color of Flux light purple, and the links have them as well. And when we check this, the mouse hover has a size, and that's pretty much it. I set it to 0.3, out circ, and I basically just set the width to 100%. But the thing that's different about these underlines versus default underlines is that they're exaggerated versions of them. They're thicker and they animate from left to right. We can see that here. And the beauty of building your own link blocks and making them exaggerated is that you can play around as much as you want. You can increase these underlines to, 6 pixels. And the more crazy they get, the more character they get. So this has a really thick underline to it, but the exaggeration makes it pronounced. It gives it personality. Another example of exaggeration is taking a disabled button. What does that look like by default? Usually gray with dark gray text on it, and you can't click it. But how can we exaggerate that a little more? Dig deep on these things. Maybe we change the pointer to a no symbol to let them know that no, you can't actually click this. But I think we can go one step further by adding an animation to this. In this example, I've added a click animation to move left and right to basically shake like a head. Again, I mentioned this earlier, but I want you to start thinking of your own body when it comes to objects on the screen. Start imitating them. What is something that you would do when someone says no? You'd probably shake your head. This is exactly what we're going to do with this button here. Because I'm doing it 1 rem to the right, which is 16 pixels, -1 rem, 0.5 rem, and then 0. And the reason that I'm doing 0.5 rem is so I can get a really light bounce effect at the end. So if I click play, it shakes nicely. And I only have it set to click once. That way, it always happens. So I'm clicking it, and the button is telling us, no, this is not usable. You can't click this in 2 different ways. It's got the no symbol, it's got the gray text, and it's got the shaking button. Lastly, we have this image on a page. And normally what you'd see is you hover on the image and maybe it grows, maybe the image inside grows, but the container stays the same. But what is another way that we can exaggerate an image? If you think about images in real life, think about the history of images, I'm thinking immediately of a film effect. So maybe that image goes from negative to color immediately on hover. And maybe like a photo in real life, it'd be like a stack of photos, so it would be slightly rotated. So I'm going to start working backwards, just like in our pose to pose straight ahead example. I'm going to add a rotation here. We're going to say -120. It's a bit too far. We're going to say -35. And I'm going to give this a filter of invert. And invert's not enough. I also want it to be black and white. So I'm going to change this to saturation and lower that down. So this is going to be our default state. When we hover, nothing happens right now. And I'm going to give this a hover. And basically, I'm just going to set this to the complete opposite. So it's going to be 100% saturation, just like in the default. It's going to be invert 0%. And with the transform, I'm going to set this back to its default position of 0. Now when we hover, it automatically flips to the correct one, but we're missing that transition state. So I'm going to add a transition, and I'm going to say all properties. Otherwise, I'm going to have to select each individual property just for this example. I'm going to set this to 600 milliseconds, which is the equivalent to 0.06. I'm going to set this to 600 milliseconds, which is the equivalent to 0.6 seconds. And I'm going to set this ease to ease out cubic. We'll go for a new one this time. So now when we preview the page, the photograph rotates, it inverts, and it becomes full color, just like exposing a real photograph in real life. Now, one other way we can really improve this, just one more time, is maybe setting the transform settings. So rather than rotating from the center, maybe I want it to rotate from the bottom, almost like holding it. And I know it's a bit off the page, but you can play with this setting on your own time. So now when I click, it sort of rotates up like a hinge. So those are just a few examples of exaggeration. It's important to take a few ideas from the page and imagine them in real life. How can I take individual small properties of that particular element and make them a little wilder than they currently are? Really push them and exaggerate the individual elements. Number 11, solid shapes. Taking into account forms in three-dimensional space or giving them volume and weight. The principle is about understanding 3D space that 2D forms occupy. In Webflow, this can be represented by using shadows and perspective to provide a sense of depth and volume to otherwise flat elements. In this example, I have a set of 3 cards, all in the same vicinity. Each one are 16 rem by 24 rem, and they're all position absolute, so they're all one on top of each other. And that's exactly what we're talking about when they say that they occupy the same volume. In this example, I have one single card container, and there's actually 3 different cards in there. But with the idea of solid shapes in mind, what we want to do is convey that there are 3 cards in there, still using the 2D space, but making it appear 3D. So what I'm going to do here is add a solid drawing hover in. And I want these cards to separate when I hover on this. So I'm going to select each individual card, and I'm going to give it a move. We're going to say that this one will get a move as well. I'm going to maybe start moving this, let's see, 10, 20, 30%. Maybe I'll move the other one minus 30%. I accidentally selected the top card. I'm going to move this one minus 30%. There we go. So we can see all 3 cards now. And I also want them to rotate because cards in 3D space are going to rotate if you held them in your hand, for example. So it's a really great way of thinking about it. How would I do this if this was actually in my real life? Let me say that this is negative 20. And then for the other one, can I add a rotate of 20? Do the opposite. So if we click play, what should happen is these cards fan out. And even though they're all solid shapes, 2D shapes on a flat plane, adding this animation of fanning really helps. But we can go a little further with this. Again, I want you to keep thinking about these like real 3D elements. How can we use exaggeration to help with the solid shapes? Let's say we have a filter on here, blur. Maybe this thing blurs slightly when you hover on it, almost like they're a little further back in space. And we'll do that with the other one as well, but maybe the blur will be less intense. So we'll do a blur 1 pixel for that one and 2 pixels for the other one. And we'll give them the same timing. We'll just select all of them and say 0.6. And we'll say bounce past. Maybe it'll have like a really cartoonish effect to it. Click play. They bounce now. And we can go one more step further. Right now, they currently just fan outwards. It has a blur, but there's really no volume scale to it. So maybe we can take this and add a scale element to the front card of 1.1. So this one grows upward towards the camera. And again, giving it the same timing as the others, we'll say bounce past because we want to have that same effect. And suddenly, 3 totally 2D elements feel like they're in a 3D space just by adding scale, rotation, move, and a little bit of blur. Number 12, appeal. And this is by far one of the hardest ones. Characters real or imagined should be appealing and command the audience's attention. Appeal can be created with the design, simplicity, magnetism, charisma, or uniqueness of a character. In Webflow, appeal can be achieved through the use of pleasing color schemes, the use of typography, graphic design. Engaging animations and interactive elements that respond to the user inputs can also add appeal. So this one's really hard to demonstrate because it really just relies simply on being a good designer, making things look really nice. In this example, I've created a heading 1 and a heading 2 with a button. This is what you'd find on a normal landing page. And I've added some things that make it look more appealing. So rather than adding a flat color to the text, I've added a nice linear gradient. And rather than doing the same thing with the button, it also gets a gradient. And when you hover, I've added a light glow to it. So these are things that you would normally find in a flat environment, but I've added just a few small tweaks to give it appeal, to make it look like you want to click it. In addition, in the background, there are these giant scrim circles, and if I delete the scrim as a background blur, you can see that there's nothing special about them. They're just red, blue, and yellow, and all they do is have a background blur over the top. I've created this really nice effect on the actual right panel called Appeal Mouse Over. And again, there's nothing special about this. All I've done is set the scrim circles and the background to move. So for example, this one moves negative 20% and then 20% on the X. So when I actually hover over it, you can see that these things move up and down, left and right, depending on where you're hovering over your mouse. And I've increased the smoothing to 100% because I want it to be almost imperceptibly animated. So I preview the page and I hover and we let it sit for a little bit. You can see that those circles slightly move. And this adds appeal to the page. It makes you want to click around things. It makes you want to explore. And that's the entire point. It makes you want to explore the page. I believe that you should design a page first to be structurally sound, have proper headings, proper syntax, and then animate afterwards. But the animation shouldn't just make it look nice. It should enhance the entire thing. It should make you want to interact with the entire page. The entire point is to stay on the page and keep the user there, not just solving problems, but bringing them real, genuine delight. And you can do that through appeal and applying all the other principles that we've gone through so far. What I want you to do is download this free clonable and give it a shot. Start with principle number 1 and apply that to your current designs and watch it transform from something amateur to professional with little to no effort. And then start applying them day by day, each principle adding to the last, and watch how you grow exponentially and become better than all of your peers. But hopefully, using these principles will earn you more money, more respect, and maybe get you on an award site or two. If you found these principles helpful at all, let us know. Leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe. And good luck applying these principles to your own designs.